My father sacrificed overseas, wiring $500 each month for 24 months to support his grandkids. Yet my husband wasted every cent at casinos. At my daughter's 6th birthday party, my dad video called us from his military base and asked, "What did she pick out with the $500 I sent?" I froze, holding the phone up so he could see Julie playing with her friends. "What $500, Dad?" I asked. Behind me, my husband's eyes bulged, and his coffee mug nearly slipped from his hand. My father's face turned concerned immediately. "The birthday money, sweetheart. I send it every month, like always," he said. I laughed, nervous and confused. "Dad, I think you're mixed up. You haven't sent anything. I would have thanked you." Dad's face darkened on the screen. "Mixed up? Kayla, I've been sending $500 every single month for 2 years. For the kids, for birthdays, for clothes, and everything you need." He disappeared from the frame, returning with a thick folder. 24 transfers a year, October, November, December, he said, holding up printout after printout to the camera. $500 each month, routing number ending in 4782. My heart stopped. That was Michael's separate account, the one for his work expenses. "For my grandkids," Dad continued, his voice breaking, "so you wouldn't struggle while I'm stationed here, so they could have birthday parties, Christmas presents, so you could buy groceries without stress." Each word hit me like a physical blow. I thought about Julie's dollar store birthday decorations, the apologetic smile when I said we'd do something special next year, the nights I skipped dinner so the kids could have enough, the ramen adventures we had twice a week, the field trips they missed. "I'm sleeping in a barracks in Kuwait," Dad said quietly, "sending half my contractor pay so you don't struggle." I turned to Michael. He stood there, face white, hands shaking. The coffee pooled around his feet like a confession. 24 months, I whispered, my mind calculating despite the shock. $500 each month. The room started spinning. $12,000, while I sold my grandmother's ring to pay for Julie's school supplies. While I drove for DoorDash after bedtime to cover groceries, while I told the kids that homemade birthdays are more special, while Michael came home late from overtime with dilated pupils and new excuses. "You've been stealing my father's money while our kids went without," I said. The silence was deafening, except for Julie's laughter from the backyard. "I was going to tell you," Michael started. "Tell me what?" I shouted. "That you've been collecting $500 a month while I worked 3 jobs? While I told Julie we couldn't afford a birthday cake from the store? Then where is it?" I grabbed his phone. "Show me where $12,000 went." His hands trembled as he unlocked it. I saw the account. Deposits from Kuwait, then withdrawals. ATM at casino, $200. ATM at casino, $300. "I have a problem," he whispered. "You had $500 coming in every month from my father while I skipped meals," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "You held me while I sobbed about failing our kids. You said we needed to budget better while you were stealing." Dad's voice came through, cold and steady. "Michael, did my granddaughter eat ramen for dinner on her birthday while you had my money in your pocket?" Michael couldn't look at the screen. "I'm 7,000 miles away in a desert," Dad said, his voice breaking. "You let my daughter think I'd forgotten them." I grabbed Michael's phone again, scrolling through the transactions. "These casino withdrawals," I said, my voice shaking. July 15th, that was Julie's first soccer game. August 3rd, her first dance recital. "You weren't stuck in traffic. You weren't at work. You were gambling while I sat alone at our child's biggest moments, making excuses for why Daddy couldn't make it." He looked at the floor with embarrassment. Then the Christmas memory hit me like a sledgehammer. "Last year I told the kids Santa was having a tough year." Julie cried. She thought she'd been bad. She came home after seeing all the other kids' presents and asked what she did wrong, I said, my voice cracking. She made a list of ways to be better so Santa would love her next time. The rage was consuming me. "You had $500 in December, another $500. In November, $1,000 while I wrapped dollar store toys in newspaper, while our perfect daughter spent a year trying to be better. Because you made her believe she wasn't good enough for Christmas." Julie ran inside, her handmade paper crown sliding. "Mommy, can we have cake now?" she asked. I looked at her sweet face, then at the homemade cake I decorated at 2 in the morning after my DoorDash shift. "Yes, baby. Go get your friends," I said. When she left, I turned back. $500 a month for 2 years. While your daughter wore shoes with holes. While your son couldn't play soccer, while I skipped lunch every day to save $5. Dad's voice cut through like a blade. I'm on the next flight home. Emergency family leave. 24 months of wire fraud, Michael. Michael's face went gray. Jim, please pack the kids' things tonight, Dad said to me, gentler now. You're done struggling alone. I'll be there in 18 hours. I looked at Julie's birthday crown on the counter, made from paper plates and aluminum foil. She never knew her grandfather had sent money for a real one. You didn't just steal money, I said quietly. You stole their relationship with him. Julie thinks her grandpa doesn't care. You stole that from her. Dad was putting on his uniform jacket. Behind him, Mom was on another phone. I heard forensic accountant. 18 hours, Dad repeated. And Michael, you better not be there when I arrive. He hung up the phone. When I turned to Michael, he was looking at me with something that said he was willing to do anything but leave peacefully. My fingers gripped the counter edge so hard my knuckles went white as Michael took a step toward me, his jaw clenched and fists tight at his sides. The birthday guests were still laughing in the backyard while my husband stood there, looking like he might actually hurt me for the first time in our marriage. I slipped my phone under the counter and typed a quick message to Dad without looking down, just 3 words that said everything. Julie burst through the back door, asking for juice boxes, and I forced my face into a smile that felt like breaking glass. Michael stepped back into the corner while I grabbed the drinks from the fridge and handed them to her with shaking hands. She skipped back outside, completely unaware that her whole world was about to change forever. My thumb found my neighbor's number, and I sent her a text, asking if she was home, just in case I needed to get the kids out fast. She replied within seconds that her door was open if we needed anything, and I felt slightly less alone. Michael watched me with those calculating eyes that told me he knew exactly what I was doing. Parents started arriving to pick up their kids, and I walked each one to the door with forced cheerfulness while Michael stayed in the kitchen. The last mom finally collected her son, and I locked the door behind them with deliberate slowness, knowing what was coming next. Michael started talking immediately about how I didn't understand, and he was going to pay it back. But I held up my hand to stop him. I pulled out my phone and hit the record button, setting it on the counter between us, where the red light blinked like a warning. He started pacing the kitchen, going back and forth between blaming his work, stress, and promising he'd get help tomorrow if I just gave him another chance. I let him talk while the phone recorded every excuse and justification that came out of his mouth. When he finally admitted to taking the money, but insisted it was just borrowing, I felt my stomach turn, but I kept my face completely neutral. The kids came inside asking about dinner, and I told them we were having a special sleepover in Mom's room tonight, making it sound like an adventure. They got excited about camping in my bedroom, and I helped them gather their stuffed animals and blankets while Michael watched from the doorway. Once they were settled with a movie on my laptop, I locked my bedroom door and heard Michael's footsteps in the hallway. He knocked once, hard enough to rattle the frame, but stopped when I reminded him the kids were listening and didn't need to hear this. I called the non-emergency police line from the bathroom with the water running to muffle my voice. The operator listened while I explained the situation and gave me a report number, saying an officer could do a drive-by if I felt unsafe. Her calm voice helped steady my nerves, even though my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I wrote down the case number. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad, showing his flight details and that he'd land at 2 in the afternoon tomorrow with a rental car already reserved. Mom messaged separately that she'd found a forensic accountant who specialized in financial abuse cases and could start documenting everything immediately. Knowing they were both mobilizing from different directions made me feel less trapped in this nightmare. I barely slept that night, getting up every hour to check the door locks and peek at the kids sleeping peacefully in my bed. Around 3 in the morning, I heard Michael moving around in the garage, and I grabbed my phone to document the time and what I was hearing. The garage door opened and closed twice. Then his truck started and sat idling for 20 minutes before he finally came back inside. I typed everything into my phone notes, creating a timeline of his movements that might matter later for evidence. By sunrise, I'd written out a detailed timeline of the last 2 years. Every late night, every missed event, every excuse about overtime. The kids woke up at their usual time, and I got them ready for school like nothing had changed, keeping their routine normal. Julie asked why we had a sleepover, and I told her it was just for fun. While I braided her hair with trembling fingers, I packed their lunches and checked their backpacks while Michael's snoring drifted from the living room couch. When I walked past to get the kids' shoes, I saw him sprawled there, surrounded by empty beer bottles and cigarette butts. The timing of this video call seems oddly perfect, doesn't it? 2 whole years of monthly payments, and it just happens to come up during the birthday party when Michael's right there with his coffee. I took photos from 3 different angles, making sure to capture the mess around him while he claimed he wanted to fix things. The morning sun lit up the evidence of his priorities perfectly. This man, who stole from his own children while drowning his guilt in alcohol. Julie asked if Daddy was sick, and I told her he was just tired while I helped her with her jacket. My son grabbed his backpack without asking any questions, but I saw him looking at his father with confused eyes. We walked out to wait for the school bus, and I held their hands tighter than usual, wondering how I'd protect them from all of this. The bus pulled up, and I watched them climb the steps before driving straight to the bank. My hands shook as I filled out the paperwork for my own checking account. The banker helped me switch my work direct deposit and showed me how to transfer exactly half from our joint account. I took screenshots of the balance before touching anything and left Michael's half untouched. Back at home, his car was still in the driveway and I could hear him snoring upstairs. I grabbed our important papers from the filing cabinet in the hallway closet. Birth certificates went into a manila folder along with social security cards and insurance documents. His desk drawer was unlocked, and I found his separate account statements, stuffed behind old tax returns. The casino withdrawals went back 3 years, not just 2. Page after page showed the same pattern, with amounts getting bigger over time. I photographed every single statement with my phone, then locked everything in my car trunk. My phone started buzzing with fraud alerts while I was still in the driveway. Michael was at an ATM downtown, draining our joint checking account. I called the bank immediately, but he'd already taken $400. The woman on the phone helped me freeze the account, but the damage was done. I took screenshots of every alert and added them to my growing folder of evidence. At the school pickup, I went straight to the main office and explained there was a family emergency. The secretary made notes in their computer system that only I could pick up the kids. Julie's teacher caught me in the hallway and mentioned Julie seemed worried today. She kept asking if everything was okay at home during story time. I told her we were dealing with some changes, but the kids were safe. Back in my car, I typed out an email to the principal, explaining the custody situation. I asked her to document any attempts by Michael to take the kids from the school. Her response came within minutes, saying they would follow protocol and only release them to me. Another safety net clicked into place while I waited for the kids to come out. Michael's texts started coming fast while I was making dinner. First, he was sorry and begging me to talk. Then he got angry, saying I was overreacting about some mistakes. Within an hour, he was threatening to take the kids if I didn't stop being dramatic. I screenshot every single message, especially the ones where he used the word take. His messages went from apologizing to blaming me to making threats, all in 60 minutes. I called legal aid and got an appointment with Lucille Donnelly for the next morning. She listened to my whole story and immediately started filling out paperwork for an emergency protective order. She said the process would take a few days, but I was doing everything right. She'd seen this pattern before with stealing, gambling, and threats. I spent the rest of the afternoon writing out every detail I could remember. Every birthday he missed, claiming overtime while he was really at the casino. Every night I went to bed hungry so the kids could eat while he had money in his pocket. Every field trip they couldn't go on because we couldn't afford the fee. My hand cramped from writing, but getting it all down on paper felt like letting poison out of my body. Lucille read through it and said it was powerful evidence for the custody case. Michael discovered I'd frozen the joint account around dinner time and sent a text calling me financially abusive. 20 minutes later, I got an alert that he'd taken a $2,000 cash advance on our credit card. The transaction showed it happened at the casino ATM, just like always. I called to freeze that card too, but the money was already gone. That brought his theft total to $14,000 between my dad's money and now this. Dad called during the kids' bath time from his layover in Germany. His voice was tired but focused as he asked for updates on everything. When he mentioned Julie's birthday party, his voice cracked a little bit. I could hear Mom in the background, making lists of things to bring and people to call. They were both in full protection mode, ready to help us rebuild everything Michael had destroyed. The next morning dragged like every minute was an hour until, finally, at 2:15 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang, and there was Dad, standing in his dusty contractor gear with his duffel bag on the porch. My knees went weak, and I grabbed the door frame while the kids screamed and ran past me into his arms. He dropped his bag and caught them both, lifting them up while looking over their heads at me with a fierce look that said nobody was going to hurt us again. Michael heard the commotion from the bedroom, and I saw him peek around the corner before slinking back when Dad's eyes found him. Dad set the kids down and told them to go play in the backyard for a bit. Then he walked straight to the kitchen table and started pulling papers from his bag. He spread out bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and printed emails across the table while Michael finally came out and sat down across from us. Dad's voice stayed low and controlled, but there was something dangerous underneath. As he went through each payment one by one, pointing at dates and amounts, October 15th, $500, while Julie wore shoes with holes. November 3rd, $500, while they ate ramen for dinner. December 1st, $500, while the kids thought Santa forgot them. Michael kept his eyes on the table and mumbled something about addiction being a disease, but Dad cut him off with a look. That could have melted steel after going through all 26 transactions. Dad told Michael to pack a bag and leave, but Michael crossed his arms and said this was his house too. That's when Dad pulled out his phone and called the police, explaining we needed a civil standby for a domestic situation. 2 officers showed up within 20 minutes and calmly explained to Michael that while they couldn't force him out permanently, tonight they strongly suggested he pack some things and find somewhere else to stay to let everyone cool down. Michael grabbed a garbage bag and started throwing clothes in it while muttering about his rights and how this was illegal. But the officers just stood there watching until he walked out the door. After they left, I couldn't sit still and definitely couldn't sleep. So I grabbed all the bank statements and started making a timeline on poster board with 2 columns. On the left, I wrote every struggle we had, every missed opportunity, every time I had to tell the kids no. On the right, I wrote every casino withdrawal Michael made with Dad's money. Seeing Julie's missed field trip next to a $200 ATM. Withdrawal at the casino made me run to the bathroom and throw up. Dad stayed up with me, making pot after pot of coffee and just letting me work through it all without trying to fix anything. Around 3 in the morning, my phone rang, and it was the forensic accountant Mom had hired, calling from the East Coast, where it was already 6 in the morning. She'd been working through the night and found the pattern was even worse than we thought, with Michael's withdrawals happening within hours of Dad's deposits most times. She'd also found 2 more transactions we'd missed, bringing the total to 26 payments and $13,000 stolen. The theft actually started 2 months before Dad told us, meaning Michael had been lying and stealing even longer. The next morning, I drove to the police station with my poster board timeline and 3 folders of evidence to file a report for theft by deception. Detective Marshall Crowe took my statement and looked through everything carefully, asking questions about dates and amounts. He assigned a case number and said he'd be in touch about next steps, but warned me these cases take time to build properly. 2 days later, Detective Crowe called back to set realistic expectations, explaining that while criminal charges were possible, the prosecutor would have to decide if they could prove intent to deceive since Michael and I were married. He suggested I focus on protecting myself and the kids through family court first, and use the criminal case as leverage if needed. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I appreciated him being honest instead of giving me false hope. That same afternoon, I called the school and scheduled Julie for counseling with Genevieve Dupree, the counselor who specialized in helping kids through family trauma. She had an opening the next day and assured me she was trained in appropriate ways to help children process difficult situations. I didn't tell Julie why she was going, just that she'd be talking to a nice lady at the school who helps kids with their feelings. The next morning, I walked Julie to the counselor's office and waited outside. While they met, my stomach in knots, wondering what my baby girl would say. After 45 minutes, Genevieve came out, holding a picture Julie had drawn of herself with a big X over her body and the word bad written underneath. She explained that Julie had internalized blame for adult problems, thinking she was bad, and that's why Santa didn't bring presents and why Daddy wasn't home anymore. The counselor gave me tools to help reassure Julie without overwhelming her with adult details, suggesting simple phrases like, "Mommy and Daddy's problems are never your fault, and you are loved no matter what." Michael's timing with that ATM withdrawal right when fraud alerts hit seems too convenient. Was he watching the account the whole time? The way he cycled through sorry, angry, then threatening in just 1 hour makes me wonder if this is a practiced routine he's used before. That night, while the kids slept, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael, proposing that he'd go to rehab and family therapy if I dropped all legal proceedings and let him come home immediately. The manipulation was so obvious it made me sick, using recovery as a bargaining chip instead of taking responsibility for what he'd done. I forwarded the text to Lucille at Legal Aid, who replied within minutes, saying this was typical behavior for someone trying to avoid consequences, and that I should maintain no direct contact going forward. Dad sat at my kitchen table that evening with his laptop open, researching custody laws while I fed the kids mac and cheese. He kept shaking his head and muttering about how the system protected abusers more than victims. When the kids went to watch cartoons, he turned the screen toward me, showing Case after case where gambling addicts still got visitation rights. His jaw clenched as he read about supervised visits and gradual reunification programs. I knew he wanted Michael completely gone, but the reality was courts rarely terminated parental rights without extreme circumstances. We spent 2 hours going through different scenarios and safety plans, marking emergency contacts in my phone, and practicing what to do if Michael showed up. Dad downloaded recording apps on my phone and showed me how to document everything. The next morning, Lucille from Legal Aid called, saying she'd filed for temporary sole custody and exclusive use of the house. She emailed me 20 pages of forms to review before our hearing the following week. Each page asked for details about our finances, living situation, and Michael's behavior. The section about domestic incidents made me realize how many warning signs I'd ignored over the years. Lucille warned me that even with everything Michael had done, he'd probably get some form of visitation eventually. The thought of handing my kids over to him made my stomach turn, but she said judges almost always preserved some parental contact. She suggested starting a journal to document everything that happened from now on. 3 nights later, at exactly 10:15, pounding on the front door woke the whole house. Michael's voice carried through the wood, demanding to see his kids, slurring slightly. Dad jumped up from the couch where he'd been sleeping and stood by the door while I grabbed my phone to call 911. The operator stayed on the line while Michael kept pounding and yelling about his rights as a father. Julie came downstairs crying, and I carried her back to her room, telling her everything was okay while my heart raced. The police arrived in 8 minutes, though it felt like hours. 2 officers talked to Michael outside while another took my statement inside. They told him about the protective order Lucille had gotten and warned him that coming back would mean immediate arrest. Michael argued with them for another 10 minutes before finally leaving. The officer gave me a case number and said to call immediately if he returned. Dad stayed up the rest of the night, sitting in a chair facing the front door. The next morning, a locksmith arrived at 7 in the morning and changed every lock in the house. Dad supervised while I made breakfast, trying to keep things normal for the kids. After lunch, we installed a video doorbell and motion sensor lights around the property. Dad showed me how to check the camera feed on my phone and set up alerts for any movement near the doors. That afternoon, we sat the kids down for a safety talk, keeping it simple and not scary. Julie asked why Daddy couldn't use his key anymore, and I just said he was staying somewhere else for a while. We practiced our safety rules, like not opening the door for anyone and always staying where Mommy could see them. Detective Crow called 2 days later, requesting authorization to subpoena Michael. Spank records and pull surveillance footage from 3 different casinos. He explained they were building a fraud case but warned it would take months to get through the system. I signed every form he sent over within an hour, desperate for some kind of justice, even if it came slowly. He mentioned finding evidence of Michael's gambling going back 5 years, way before Dad started sending money. While going through our mail that had piled up, I found 3 notices I didn't recognize. They were from different payday loan companies, thanking me for my recent applications. My hands shook as I called the numbers and discovered Michael had used my Social Security number to borrow $5,000 total. Each company said the loans were taken out online using my information, but from IP addresses I didn't recognize. The rage was so intense I had to sit down before I passed out. I spent the next 6 hours on hold with credit bureaus and filing reports with everyone who would listen. First Experian, then TransUnion, then Equifax, each requiring the whole story again. The woman at Experian said she handled 5 similar cases every week and walked me through freezing my credit completely. I filed reports with the FTC and local police, adding more paper to my growing folder of Michael's crimes. Each phone call meant explaining again how my husband stole from my father and used my identity to fund his gambling. The representative at the 3rd payday loan company said they'd need a police report to investigate the fraud. I drove to the station that afternoon and filed another report, adding identity theft to the list. Genevieve from Child Services called the next day with advice about maintaining stability for the kids during all this chaos. She suggested keeping their routines exactly the same with regular bedtimes, consistent meals, and predictable schedules. It felt impossible to act normal when everything was falling apart, but she said children needed that structure more than ever during upheaval. She gave me specific strategies, like keeping their favorite food stocked and maintaining our Friday movie night tradition. We kept going to the park every afternoon and reading the same bedtime stories. 4 days later, I got a call from someone named Ellis Ditt, who said they were Michael's new addiction counselor. They explained Michael had enrolled in an outpatient gambling addiction program and wanted to discuss appropriate boundaries during his treatment. Ellis said recovery was a long process, often taking years, and that Most people relapsed multiple times before achieving stability. They appreciated that I was maintaining distance and said it was the healthiest choice for everyone involved. Ellis confirmed that family counseling wasn't appropriate until Michael showed sustained recovery, and I felt safe participating. They supported my decision to keep the kids away during his initial treatment phase. Ellis would send monthly updates about his attendance, but said real change took time and consistent work that Michael had just started. 2 weeks later, I sat in the courtroom, watching the judge flip through the stack of evidence Lucille had prepared. The temporary custody hearing had finally arrived after what felt like forever waiting. Michael sat at the other table with his court-appointed lawyer, his hands folded like he was praying. The judge looked up from the financial documents showing the stolen money and the gambling records. She asked Michael directly about the $12,000, and he stumbled through an answer about having a problem and getting help. When she asked about the payday loans in my name, his lawyer objected, but she overruled it. After 40 minutes of testimony and reviewing evidence, she granted me primary custody with Michael getting supervised visitation every other Saturday, pending further evaluation. It wasn't the complete protection I wanted for the kids, but at least someone would be watching him with them. The judge specifically mentioned the financial abuse evidence concerned her and ordered Michael to continue treatment. Walking out of the courthouse, Lucille warned me this was just temporary until the full hearing in 3 months. The next morning, I met with the district attorney's office about the criminal charges. The prosecutor, a tired-looking woman with stacks of files on her desk, explained that proving wire fraud intent was almost impossible since we were married when it happened. She said courts generally view marital assets as shared property, even when one spouse hides money from the other. But the identity theft with the payday loans was different since he forged my signature and used my social security number without permission. She would move forward with those charges but warned me it could take months and might only result in probation if he had no prior record. I left, feeling frustrated that stealing from family somehow counted less than stealing from strangers. That weekend, Dad sat me down at the kitchen table with a folder of paperwork. His emergency leave was ending in 3 days, and he had to return to Kuwait. He'd set up a trust account for the kids that only I could access with 2 forms of ID and a notarized signature. No way Michael could touch it, even if he somehow got my information again. Mom would stay another week to help with logistics and getting the kids settled into their new routine. Dad made me promise to call him if anything happened, no matter how small. The supervised visitation center was a converted office building with toys and cameras in every room. Michael's first visit was scheduled for Saturday morning, and Julie had been asking about Daddy all week. When we arrived, she ran to him immediately, then stopped short when she saw the supervisor sitting in the corner with a clipboard. Michael tried to act normal, but Julie kept looking at the stranger and asking why she was there. He told her it was just someone to help him play, but Julie wasn't stupid. She clung to him for a few minutes, then pulled away, confused about the whole setup. When I picked her up 2 hours later, she had a complete meltdown in the car. Michael's sudden interest in rehab, right when legal trouble hits, makes me wonder if he's done this dance before with other people. How convenient that he discovers the path to recovery exactly when consequences show up at his door. She sobbed about missing Daddy and not understanding why someone had to watch them. I held her in the back seat while she cried herself to exhaustion, my heart breaking for her confusion about why her world had changed. That night, my email inbox filled with messages from Michael, long, rambling walls of text, alternating between taking responsibility and blaming me for breaking up our family. He said his counselor told him to journal his feelings, but instead of keeping them private, he sent every thought to me. One paragraph would admit he had a problem, the next would accuse me of overreacting. I forwarded everything to Lucille without reading past the first few lines. She said to keep documenting everything for the permanent custody hearing. Monday brought a new crisis when I found an eviction notice taped to our door. The landlord had been trying to reach us for weeks about missed rent payments. It turned out Michael hadn't paid rent for October or November, pocketing that money too while I stressed about buying groceries. 2 months behind meant we owed $3,600 plus late fees. I called the landlord immediately, explaining the situation while pacing the empty apartment. He agreed to a payment plan if I could pay half immediately and the rest over 3 months. Dad wired the money that afternoon, adding to my pile of shame and gratitude. I spent hours that night weighing whether to move in with my parents on the East Coast or keep the kids in their school district for stability. Julie had already lost so much, and changing schools mid-year seemed cruel. Her teacher said she was struggling with the changes at home and needed consistency. So I signed up with 3 grocery delivery apps and started driving every night after the kids went to bed. Dad protested when he found out, but I needed to stand on my own feet somehow. The exhaustion was worth keeping Julie in her familiar classroom with her friends. Detective Crow called Wednesday with an update that made me physically sick. He'd obtained surveillance footage from the casino for specific dates I'd provided. October 15th, the timestamp showed Michael at a poker table during Julie's first dance recital. I remembered sitting alone in that auditorium, making excuses to other parents about why her daddy couldn't make it. The November 3rd footage was worse, showing him laughing with other players during her first soccer game while I cheered alone from the sidelines. Seeing him having fun while I held back tears at her events destroyed something inside me that I didn't know could still break. Ellis called the following week with concerning news about Michael's treatment compliance. He'd missed 2 group sessions, and when he did attend, he minimized his addiction and blamed external stressors. The supervised visitation center also reported he seemed agitated and distracted during visits, checking his phone constantly, and cutting visits short. Ellis said this behavior suggested he wasn't fully committed to recovery yet. Saturday morning at Julie's soccer practice, I was helping her tie her cleat when another parent grabbed my arm. She pointed across the field where Michael stood by the fence, watching. My protective orders specifically prohibited him from being within 500 feet of the kids' activities. I kept Julie distracted with stretches while frantically calling 911. Other parents formed a subtle barrier between him and the field. By the time police arrived 15 minutes later, he'd already left, but I filed another report documenting the violation. The officer said these reports would help at the next hearing to show a pattern of disregarding court orders. 2 days later, I sat in Lucille's office, filling out the paperwork for a full protective order while she explained that Michael's repeated violations would strengthen our case. She pulled out photos from the soccer field incident and the police reports from each violation. The stack of evidence was getting thicker every week. I signed form after form, requesting suspension of all visits until Michael completed the court requirements he'd been ignoring. My hand cramped from writing the same information over and over. Lucille photocopied everything twice and handed me my copies in a manila folder. The constant watching over my shoulder was wearing me down, but I couldn't let my guard drop now. That night, Julie had the worst meltdown yet. At bedtime, she screamed and kicked her little legs against the mattress, asking why Daddy didn't live here anymore. I held her tight while she exhausted herself, crying into my shoulder. Her small body shook with sobs as she asked if it was her fault Daddy left. She kept asking if Daddy still loved her through hiccups and tears. I rocked her back and forth, telling her Daddy loved her very much but had to live somewhere else right now. These were the moments that made me hate Michael most. 3 days later, the judge reviewed our case and granted a partial protective order that covered our home and my workplace. He said Michael could still have supervised visits, but only after completing an anger management assessment first. It wasn't the full protection I wanted, but the judge acknowledged the pattern of violations on record. Lucille squeezed my shoulder and reminded me that small victories still mattered. The next week, Dad had to return to Kuwait for his contract. But first, he set up automatic monthly transfers to a new trust account just for the kids' needs. He showed me how to access it online and made me promise to use it only for Julie and her brother. I could hear the pain in his voice during our daily phone calls from the base. He kept apologizing for being so far away during all this mess. Mom stayed 3 more days to help me figure out new routines for the kids. She color-coded a calendar with pickup times and meal plans and taped it to the fridge. I changed my work schedule to cut out all the late-night delivery shifts so I could keep bedtime consistent for the kids. Money was tighter than ever without those extra hours, but their sleep mattered more than the extra $40 a night. We ate pasta 4 nights a week and peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day, but at least we ate together at the table. Detective Crow called while I was making mac and cheese to update me on the criminal case. He said the identity theft charges were moving forward, but the wire fraud was still stuck in review with the prosecutor's office. I could hear his frustration through the phone as he explained that financial crimes took forever to prosecute. But he assured me the payday loan fraud was solid and would definitely stick. Sometimes I forgot there might be actual consequences for Michael beyond just our divorce. 2 weeks later, Michael's attorney sent a formal request for mediation about custody and money matters. The letter proposed meeting with a neutral third party to work out an agreement without going to trial. Lucille called to discuss it and said she'd agree, but only with strict boundaries in place. We'd have separate arrival times, with me going in first and Michael waiting outside until I was seated. Security would be present the whole time, and we'd only discuss specific topics she'd approve ahead of time. My stomach turned just thinking about being in the same room as him, but I knew we had to try mediation before trial. The mediation happened the following Tuesday in a gray conference room downtown. Michael sat across the long table, looking smaller than I remembered, while his lawyer shuffled papers. We spent 4 hours going back and forth about visit schedules and support payments. The mediator kept us focused on the kids' needs instead of our anger. Michael agreed to child support of $600 a month, though we both knew he'd probably never pay it. He accepted that visits would stay supervised until he completed all court requirements, including the anger assessment and parenting classes. The house would stay with me and the kids for now, since disrupting their home would cause more trauma. Driving home from mediation, I gripped the steering wheel and thought about what we'd accomplished. Child support was ordered, even if Michael never paid it. Visits would stay supervised, which meant the kids were protected. The house was ours for now, which meant no moving and changing schools. It wasn't justice for the $12,000 he stole or the months of suffering while Dad's money went to casinos. But it was structure and stability. And right now, that's exactly what my kids needed most. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I really enjoyed just wandering through all those curious moments together. Until next time, if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.